According to Hindu legend, there was once a mystical kingdom located in the middle of the sea. The city was home to 900 palaces, all made of gold, and was supposed to have arisen out of the waters on the command of Lord Krishna. Recently, underwater archaeologists claim to have located what some believe to be the foundations of this fabulous lost city off the coast of modern Dwarka in western India. Char Dham, literally meaning the four abodes or seats, are the names of four pilgrimage sites in India that are widely revered by Hindus. It comprises of Badrinath, Dwarka, Puri, and Rameswaram. Dwarka is often identified with the Dwarka kingdom, the ancient kingdom of Krishna, and is believed to have been the first capital of Gujarat. According to legend, Krishna founded the city in Gujarat's west coast after he defeated and killed his uncle Kansa at Mathura. In Indian epic literature, the ancient city is also known as Dwarka. Traditionally, modern Dwarka is identified with Dwarka. Ancient Dwarka is supposed to have sank into the sea in remote history. The ancient and modern city, now known as Dwarka, is located on the western tip of the Saurashtra Peninsula in Gujarat, northwestern India. In the 14th century, the town's original temples were destroyed by the Delhi emperors, but the most important of them, Jagat Mandir, was subsequently rebuilt. Jagat Mandir, also known as the Dwarkadish Temple, is a Hindu temple dedicated to god Krishna, who is worshipped here with the name of Dwarkadish, or the King of Dwarka. The five-story sandstone edifice is supported by 72 pillars and was constructed in the 15th to 16th centuries in the Chalukya style. It covers an area of 69 by 88.5 feet, with its spire a dizzying 257 feet high. The temple is visited by thousands of pilgrims every year. Ancient Dwarka is mentioned in a number of Indian texts, including the Mahabharata, the Shrimad, and the Bhagavad Gita. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka as having 900,000 royal palaces, all constructed of crystal and silver and decorated with emeralds. The ancient city was connected by an elaborate system of boulevards, roads, marketplaces, assembly houses, and temples. Archaeological investigations in the city of Dwarka and offshore in the Arabian Sea have been undertaken by the Archaeological Survey of India since the 1960s. Over the past decade or so, underwater excavations have uncovered interesting remains at a depth of 120 feet in the Gulf of Cambay off the western coast of India. Some reports claim these discoveries could be over 9,000 years old and cover an area 5 miles long and 2 miles wide. Marine archaeologists have used a technique known as sub-bottom profiling to reveal that the building's remains stand on enormous foundations. One news report in the New Indian Express from August 2018 stated sensationally, marine scientists say archaeological remains discovered 36 meters, 120 feet underwater in the Gulf of Cambay off the western coast of India could be over 9,000 years old. It's believed to predate the oldest known remains in the subcontinent by more than 5,000 years. Carbon dating on debris recovered from the site, including construction material, pottery, sections of walls, beads, sculpture, and human bones and teeth, put it at nearly 9,500 years old, making it older than the Sumerian civilization by several thousand years. It's also older than the Egyptian and Chinese civilizations. The city is believed to be even older than the ancient Harappan civilization. Sandstone walls and a grid of streets and other evidence of a seaport 70 feet underwater, alongside artifacts dating back to 7,500 BC, have convinced some researchers that finally the legendary city of 900,000 royal palaces has been located. The archaeological explorations off the coast of Dwarka have also brought to light a large number of stone structures. These are semicircular, rectangular, and square stone edifices scattered randomly over a vast area. Besides these structures, many varieties of stone anchors have been uncovered alongside the structures as well. Such findings suggest that the ancient Dwarka was once a busy port. though these structures are thought to date to comparatively late in the site's history, probably belonging to the late medieval period. Indeed, various Indian historians have stated that the stone anchors match those used in the Indo-Arab trade from the 8th to 14th century AD. However, this recent date has not stopped some from claiming that the remains represent the legendary lost city of Dwarka and so must be 9,000 years old. The lead archaeologist of a number of excavations at the site, the late Dr. S.R. Rao, described the town plan of early Dwarka based on his team's discoveries. There were 2 fortification walls, one on the lower terrace and other in the middle terrace. These walls, which extend over a length of 4 kilometers on the eastern shore, are mostly destroyed by sea action. The walls of the lower terrace are of massive, dressed sandstone blocks, while that of the upper terrace are of rubble. The houses and other public buildings, built of smaller-sized stones within the enclosures, are all destroyed and leveled up by the encroachment of the sea. These structures lie at a depth of 7 to 10 meters below the present mean sea level, indicating a rise of 10 meters in sea level during the last 3,600 years. In the opinion of some researchers, the rise in sea level mentioned by Dr. Rao seems to indicate that ancient Dwarka was destroyed by a great flood. Indeed, for some archaeological proof of the existence of the Dwarka and its submergence, perhaps in the 2nd millennium BC, reflects the truth of the descriptions in the Mahabharata. For them, the finds would make the Mahabharata not merely a book of myths and legends, but to some extent a genuine account of past events. In September 2019, it seemed that final proof for the wonderful architectural achievements of ancient Dwarka have been discovered underwater off modern Dwarka. A Twitter user going by the name @JIKS shared 4 sensational photos showing ornately decorated underwater sculptures and structures, with one resembling a temple tower. There was a claim accompanying the image which stated, "Sri Krishna's Dwarka, the sunken city in Gujarat, as described in the Mahabharata. It is real, yet the Christian world says there is no proof." The tweet was retweeted over 1,500 times. However, subsequent research into the 4 images revealed the falseness of the claim. One image, showing the sculpture of a lion with its left paw resting on a ball, was traced to an underwater memorial reef near Key Biscayne in Miami, Florida. It is the largest man-made reef in the world and contains 2 statues of lions to mark the entrance to the site. It is a photo of one of these lions which was used on Twitter as proof of new discoveries from ancient Dwarka. The 3 other images were also traced to various other online sources, including various photoshopped composite images using various temple remains collected from all over the world. Consequently, it's obvious that the images used on Twitter have no connection whatsoever to ancient Dwarka. Indeed, the whole claim of a submerged civilization off the coast of Dwarka, dating back 9,000 years, rests on extremely shaky grounds. In the media accounts of the discoveries, the claim of the city being 9,000 years old is based entirely on one radiocarbon date from a single piece of wood. But this piece of wood could very easily have belonged to a tree that existed prior to these underwater remains. No other object from the excavations has actually been dated. Experts have pointed out that the area in which remains have been found has huge tidal movements which would have moved artifacts and even structures around, perhaps many miles from their original locations. Furthermore, many of these stone objects found seem to be geofacts rather than artifacts, that is, natural objects made by water and sand erosion. The argument that there's a submerged 9,000-year-old Dwarka in the area is based on the premise that a submerged coastal settlement could only have been built when sea levels were much lower, and therefore could only have been built before the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago. Researchers believe they have uncovered the first clear example of a treasure the ancient Egyptians brought home with them from the legendary lost land of Punt. It is a 3,300-year-old baboon skull, a remnant of animal that was revered in ancient Egypt but was not native to the land of the pharaohs. the legendary treasures of Punt. The ancient Egyptians wrote about the land of Punt and depicted it as a prosperous location from 2450 BC to 1155 BC. They went to Punt, which they referred to as God's land, to acquire gold, African blackwood, ebony, ivory, aromatic raisins, wild animals, and slaves. One of the most famous artworks created about this location is the Punt colonnade on Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahari, demonstrating that her people brought her myrrh trees, gold, ivory, panther skins, and apes back from Punt. The travels to Punt for treasures also demonstrate the ancient Egyptians' nautical skills. Nathaniel Dominy, a primatologist at Dartmouth College and lead author of the new study, explained that the long-distance seafaring between Egypt and Punt, two sovereign entities, was a major milestone in human history because it drove the evolution of maritime technology. Trade in exotic luxury goods, including baboons, was the engine behind early nautical innovations. Archaeologists believe that the land of the Punt was a real place. However, there is still a debate about where it was actually located. Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia are just a few of the proposed locations. This is why researchers have taken a particular interest in the 3,300-year-old baboon skull. If this baboon really did come from Punt, and they could identify its homeland, the mystery may be solved. Dominy states in a press release, "Many scholars view trade between Egypt and Punt as the first long maritime step in a trade network known as the Spice Route, which would go on to shape geopolitical fortunes for millennia." Other scholars put it more simply, describing the Egypt-Punt relationship as the beginning of economic globalization. Baboons were central to this commerce, so determining the location of Punt is important. For over 150 years, Punt has been a geographic mystery. Dominy says, "Our analysis is the first to show how mummified baboons can be used to inform this enduring debate." Analyzing the baboon skull. Even though there are records and artwork listing and depicting the goods Egyptians took from Punt, Science magazine reports that archaeologists have found little hard evidence for treasures from Punt to date. Dominy and his colleagues believe that their research will change that. They identified a Hamadryas baboon skull tucked away in the British Museum's archives and think that the fossil that was discovered in Thebes, Luxor, in the 19th century came from Punt. The results of their study, published on eLife, explains that they studied the chemical isotopes in the baboon's tooth enamel to try to pinpoint the animal's birthplace. Isotopic analysis is a useful tool for this endeavor because different places have distinct ratios of strontium isotopes in the soil and water, and this isotopic signature of the place where the animal lives the first years of their life is seen in their tooth enamel, thanks to the water they drink and the foods they consume. No matter where the animal lives later in life, their homeland's isotopic signature remains in their tooth enamel, unaltered by time. The results of the chemical analysis of the baboon skull show that the animal wasn't born in Egypt. In their paper, the researchers write that it came from a region that it encompasses much of present-day Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti, and portions of Somalia and Yemen. They write that this region corroborates the balance of scholarly conjecture on the location of Punt, and also is a testament to the tremendous reach of Egyptian seafaring during the 2nd millennium BC. Dominy says that this implies the baboon is the first known Puntite treasure. According to Science magazine, Catherine Bard, an archaeologist at Boston University, said that the baboon skull study provides another piece of evidence on where Punt was located. Bard believes that Punt is either in Eritrea or eastern Sudan. She also tells Science magazine that this isn't the first example of a treasure from Punt because her excavations at Mersa Wadi Gawasis unearthed obsidian ebony fragments, which she asserts came from Punt. Dominy disagreed, saying that ebony, for example, was widely distributed across Africa, so Bard's discovery was not necessarily a treasure from Punt. high-status baboons in ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians linked hamadryas baboons to their god of wisdom and the creator of hieroglyphics, Thoth and Amun-Ra, the sun god. They considered the animals sacred and depicted them in their sculptures, reliefs, and paintings, even though they're not native animals to Egypt. Egyptologist Dr. Geraldine Pinch has also noted that baboons were connected with Duat, the underworld in ancient Egyptian religion, saying, "The image of the Thoth baboon beside a wedge eye occurs on magic wands as early as the 20th century BC. Two baboon form of the god Khons control the Book of the End of the Year. These contain lists of those who were destined to die and those who would live." Anaut Balaji has written that baboons were associated with ancient Egyptian kings too. For example, King Nama is shown as being transformed into a baboon known as the Great White One, as part of a rejuvenation festival scene. Bajaji noticed that some scholars opine that the title of this god is derived from the silver-grey mane of a dominant hamadryas, and individual ancestors were ritually deified in the form of baboons and received cultic offerings. When archaeologists were excavating a dried-up lagoon known as Mersa Goasis, they discovered traces of an ancient harbor that had helped launch early voyages, like Hatshepsut's, onto the open ocean. Man-made caves in the area contain timber, rigging, limestone anchors, steering oars, reed mats, cedar planks, and the remains of one of the oldest sea-going ships ever discovered. These artifacts have offered proof of the Egyptians' nautical skills and also provided important clues to the location of Punt. A more recent discovery adds weight to the evidence that Punt was located somewhere in Africa and not on the Arabian Peninsula. Science in Poland reports that archaeologists and ornithologists have identified a depiction of a bird on the portico of Punti in the Temple of Hatshepsut as a secretary bird, Sagittarius serpentarius, a very large bird of prey found only in Africa, particularly around coastal regions in Sudan. For centuries, the Land of Punt has been delegated to the realm of myth and folklore, but more and more recent findings are making it clear that Punt was not a mythical place, it's a real location that is still waiting to be found. The city of Heracleion, home of the temple where Cleopatra was inaugurated, was swallowed by the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Egypt nearly 1,200 years ago. It was one of the most important trade centers in the Mediterranean before it sank more than a millennia ago. For centuries, the existence of Heracleion was believed to be a myth, much like the city of Atlantis is viewed today. But in 2000, the underwater archaeologist Frank Goddio finally found the sunken city after extensive underwater research in today's Abu Qir Bay. Before this modern-day discovery, Heracleion had been all but forgotten, relegated to a handful of inscriptions and phrases in ancient texts by the likes of Strabo and Diodorus. The Greek historian Herodotus, 5th century BC, writes of a great temple that was built where the mythological hero Heracles, or Heracles, first set foot in Egypt. He also claimed that Helen of Troy and Paris visited the city before their famous Trojan War. 4 centuries after Herodotus visited Egypt, the Greek photographer Strabo noted that the city of Heracleion was located to the east of Canopus at the mouth of the River Nile. The underwater archaeologist Frank Goddio is known as a pioneer of modern maritime archaeology. Goddio founded the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, IEASM, in 1987, with the aim to explore and research underwater archaeological sites. IEASM is known for having developed a systematic approach using geophysical prospecting techniques on underwater archaeological sites. By exploring the area in parallel straight lines at regular intervals, the team can identify anomalies on the sea floor, which can then be explored by divers or robots. In 1992, IEASM began mapping the area around the port of Alexandria, and in 1996 they extended their research to include Abu Qir Bay, tasked by the Egyptian government to discover Canopus, Thonis, and Heracleion, all believed to have been reclaimed by the Mediterranean Sea. This research allowed them to understand the topography and circumstances that caused submersion of the area over time. The team used information from historical texts to establish the areas of primary interest. The survey of Abu Qir Bay covered a research area of 11 by 15 kilometers, 6.8 by 9.3 miles. Beginning in 1996, the mapping of the Abu Qir Bay took years. In 1999, they discovered Canopus, and in 2000, they discovered Heracleion. The site of the sunken city of Heracleion remained hidden in the Bay of Abu Qir for so long because the remains of the ancient city are covered with sediment. The upper layer of the seafloor is made up of sand and silt deposited as it exits the River Nile. The team from IEASM was able to locate remains by creating detailed magnetic maps, which provided the evidence needed to finally pinpoint the location of Heracleion. Now submerged under the waters of the Mediterranean Sea, in its heyday, Heracleion was located at the mouth of the River Nile, 32 kilometers, 20 miles, to the northeast of Alexandria in ancient Egypt. The enormous city was an important port for trade with Greece, as well as a religious center, where sailors would dedicate gifts to the gods. The city was also politically significant, with pharaohs needing to visit the Temple of Amun to become universal sovereign. Using cutting-edge technology and in collaboration with the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities, IEASM managed to locate, map, and excavate the ancient sunken city of Heracleion, which was found 10 meters, 32.8 feet, below the water and 6.5 kilometers, 4 miles, from the current-day coastline in the western part of Abu Qir Bay. After removing layers of sand and mud, divers uncovered the extraordinary well-preserved city with many of its treasures still intact. These included the main temple of Amun-Gurb, giant statues of pharaohs, hundreds of smaller statues of gods and goddesses, a sphinx, 64 ancient shipwrecks, 700 anchors, stone blocks with both Greek and Egyptian inscriptions, dozens of sarcophagi, gold coins, and weights made from bronze and stone. Among the remains of the once great city, the underwater archaeologists discovered an enormous 5.4-meter, 7.7 feet statue of Hapi, the god dedicated to the inundation of the Nile. This was one of 3 colossal red granite sculptures discovered dating back to the 4th century BC. In 2001, the team also discovered an ancient stele originally commissioned by Nectanebo I sometime between 378 and 362 BC, complete with detailed and clearly readable inscriptions. The inscriptions on this ancient stele allowed the archaeologists to determine that the ancient cities of Thonis and Heracleion were in fact one of the same, Thonis being the name used originally by the Egyptians and Heracleion being the ancient Greek name. From then on, the ancient sunken city was known as Thonis Heracleion. Spectacular photographs of the discovery and recovery process reveal numerous statues and structures that once stood tall and mighty in the great city. One photo shows a Greco-Egyptian statue of a Ptolemaic queen, which stands eerily on the seabed, surrounded only by sediment and darkness, while another photograph shows the face of a great pharaoh peering up out of the sand. In an interview with the BBC in 2015, Frank Goddio explained that the policy of the IEASM underwater excavations was to learn as much as we can by touching as little as we can and leaving it for future technology. At that point, around 2% of the site had been excavated. The clay sediment from the Nile, which has hidden the ancient city for so long, also acts to protect the artifacts on the sea floor from the sea water. In the case of artifacts which are removed from their hidden underwater sanctuary, IEASM takes a great deal of care to restore and preserve them on board their ships and in laboratories. In some cases, this has taken days, but in others, such as that of the enormous Hapi statue, this took 2.5 years. Built on the Nile Delta, the city itself was traversed by a vast network of canals and was said to be stunningly beautiful. Dubbed the Venice of the Nile, Heracleion was at one point the largest port in the Mediterranean. Explorations of the site have concluded that the city probably gradually declined in importance as it slipped into the sea during the second half of the 8th century AD. This begs the question of why such a significant city was lost. The causes include a series of geological phenomena and cataclysmic events. IEASM joined forces with other institutions to conduct geological research, which has shown that the southeastern basin of the Mediterranean was affected by slow subsidence, the rise in sea levels, and local phenomenon related to the constitution of the soil in the area, which together formed the conditions for cities such as Heracleion to sink into the sea. In 2005, IEASM attained permission from the Egyptian authorities, who own the artifacts, to arrange a touring exhibition of the artifacts discovered. The resulting exhibition, entitled Egypt's Sunken Treasures, toured major cities in Germany, Spain, Italy, and Japan. The exhibition at the Grand Palais in France averaged a record of 7,500 visitors per day. The British Museum joined forces with Frank Gaudio in 2015 to arrange its first underwater archaeology exhibition, which included about 200 artifacts discovered off the coast of Egypt by IEASM between 1996 and 2012. By then, Gaudio estimated that they had explored only about 5% of the ancient city of Heracleion, estimated to cover an area of about 3.5 square kilometers, 1.3 miles. According to the art newspaper, Gaudio stated that this would be a big undertaking on land, but under the sea and under the sediment, it's a task that will take hundreds of years. To understand the scale of this task, Heracleion is about 3 times the size of Pompeii, and archaeologists have been excavating that particular catastrophic site for over 100 years. The exhibition at the British Museum, entitled Sunken Cities, Egypt's Lost Worlds, was also presented at the Institut du Monde Arabe in Paris in 2015 and at the St. Louis Art Museum in the United States. Its last stop was the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts up until January 2021, before the artifacts returned to Egypt. The discovery of Heracleion raises important questions about whether so-called mythical cities exist in reality. If a city once believed to be a myth can be uncovered from the depths of the sea, who knows what other legendary sunken cities of the past will be uncovered in the future? Only time will tell.
Carved directly into vibrant red, white, pink, and sandstone cliff faces, the prehistoric Jordanian city of Petra was lost to the Western world for hundreds of years. Located amid rugged desert canyons and mountains in what is now the southwestern corner of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, Petra was once a thriving trading center and the capital of the Nabatean Empire between 400 BC and AD 106. The city sat empty and in near ruin for centuries. Only in the early 1800s did a European traveler disguise himself in Bedouin costume and infiltrate the mysterious locale. In 1985, the Petra Archaeological Park was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and in 2007, it was named one of the new 7 Wonders of the World. Several scenes from the Hollywood blockbuster Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade were filmed in Petra. The movie's fictional Canyon of the Crescent Moon was modeled on the eastern entrance to Petra, a 250-foot, 76-meter-high sandstone slot canyon known as the Seek that leads directly to Al-Khazna, the treasury, perhaps the most stunning of Petra's dozens of breathtaking features. In the film's climactic final scenes, actors Harrison Ford and Sean Connery burst forth from the Seek and walk deep into the labyrinths of the treasury in their quest to find the Holy Grail. But as usual, archaeological fact bowed to Hollywood fiction when Indy came to Petra. In reality, the treasury is nothing more than a facade with a relatively small hall once used as a royal tomb. You can't really say that anything in Indiana Jones is accurate, Haifa University archaeologist Ronnie Reich said. I was once asked in the United States if one of the responsibilities of Israeli archaeologists is to chase down Nazis. I told them, not anymore. A giant urn carved above the entrance to the treasury bears the marks of hundreds of gunshots. Bedouin tribesmen living in and among the ancient ruins say the damage was caused when local men would open fire with rifles, seeking the loot thought to be inside the urn, actually made of solid stone. There are dozens of tombs and other carved or constructed structures and sites within Petra. The Nabateans, before they were conquered and absorbed into the Roman Empire, controlled a vast tract of the Middle East, from modern-day Israel and Jordan into the northern Arabian Peninsula. The remains of their innovative networks of water capture, storage, transport, and irrigation systems are found to this day throughout this area. Scholars knew the Nabateans were in Petra since at least 312 BC, says archaeologist Zaidun al-Muhaizen of Jordan's Yarmouk University. Al-Muhaizen, who has been excavating in Petra since 1979 and specializes in the Nabatean period, says no one has yet found any archaeological evidence dating back to the 4th century BC. The earliest findings thus far date back only to the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. But more clues remain beneath the surface. We have uncovered just 15% of the city, he says. The vast majority, 85%, is still underground and untouched. Numerous scrolls in Greek, dating to the Byzantine period, were discovered in an excavated church near the Winged Lion Temple in Petra in December 1993. Researchers at the American Center of Oriental Research in Amman, the capital, are now analyzing the scrolls and hope they will shed light on life in Petra during this period. Once Rome formally took possession of Petra in AD 106, its importance in international trade began to wane. The decay of the city continued, aided by earthquakes and the rise in the importance of sea trade routes, and Petra reached its nadir near the close of the Byzantine Empire's rule around AD 700. Another lost city yet to reveal all its secrets is Colombia's ancient Teyuna, once a capital of the Teyuna people. In 1976, a group of Colombian archaeologists and their guides embarked on a grueling mission to save an ancient site from looters. Swinging machetes, they inched their way over the thick jungle foothills of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta near Colombia's Caribbean coast. The area had once been inhabited by the Teyuna, a pre-Columbian civilization that flourished in the centuries before the Spanish conquest in the 16th century. Their remarkable interconnected settlements were being slowly rediscovered, excavated, documented, and studied. Days into the trek, the archaeologists, all members of Colombia's Institute of Anthropology, were feeling the strain. The long hike through the dense jungle was exacerbated by the searing heat, torrential rain, and biting insects. Their mission was urgent. Authorities had been tipped off that a major archaeological site had been found by huaqueros, archaeological looters. Items from the site had already begun appearing on the antiquities black market. The team needed to bring the site under state control before more damage was done to the country's heritage. The team was trying to reach an area that is generally known as Teyuna, which they had taken to calling a less formal name Ciudad Perdida, Lost City. The Teyuna had abandoned many of their settlements in the late 1600s, but their descendants, who still live in the Sierra Nevada, had never really considered the city lost. To outsiders, it had vanished, swallowed by the Sierra Nevada's 15,000 square miles of jungle. The Teyuna culture developed in the region around AD 200. The Teyuna were related to the Muisca peoples, who lived to the south around what is now the Colombian capital of Bogotá. Like the Muisca, the Teyuna excelled in craftsmanship of precious metals such as gold, which may have fed the myth of El Dorado. They were noted for their resistance to the Spanish conquistadors, staving off the invaders until around 1600, a remarkable feat given the relatively rapid subjugation of the mighty Inca and Aztec. Spanish chronicler Juan de Castellanos identified them as Tyros in the mid-1500s. Their conspicuously rich dress attracted the attention of other chroniclers, who described them as both astute and imperious. The Spanish reported that they wore patterned capes, headdresses of feathers, and necklaces of beads, mother of pearl, carnelian, and gold. In the late 20th century, rumors of Teyuna treasure in the jungle attracted looters. By the early 1970s, thousands of huaqueros were operating in Sierra Nevada, employed by gang leaders. Two of the workers were Florentino Sepulveda and his son, who in 1975 discovered stone steps leading up a hillside. Realizing they had stumbled on an unexcavated site, the Sepulvedas found artifacts, which they looted and later sold. When other huaqueros learned of the discovery, a violent turf war broke out. In the end, some looters decided to cooperate with the authorities and passed on information about the site's location to them. The archaeologists from the Colombian Institute of Anthropology had been exploring the region since 1973 and had already located 199 Teyuna villages. The expedition dispatched to secure this new exciting find consisted of a team of 3 archaeologists, an architect, and 2 looters turned guides. A low flyover confirmed the vegetation was too thick to land by helicopter, so the team decided to go on foot and cut through the Infierno Verde, the green hell, a local term for conditions in the thick jungle. The first thing they saw on climbing Teyuna's principal stairway of around 1,200 steps was the early signs of looters. Holes and sherds of pottery spread all over the ground. Hacking back the jungle growth as best they could, they revealed more stairways, terraces, and the remains of other massive buildings in good condition. Over the course of 3 days at the site, they observed and sketched their findings in relentless rain. On their return, Álvaro Soto, the director of the Institute of Anthropology, immediately understood the importance of the find. It was Colombia's monumental site par excellence. It was part of our identity and a link with our pre-Hispanic past, he said. He also highlighted another aspect, the nearby presence of indigenous communities, the Wiwa, Kogi, Arhuaco, and Canquamo, considered the living descendants of the Teyuna, so they could help us understand the site. In the decades since then, a large-scale research project has restored the 200 structures, including circular houses, paved roads, stairways, terraces, as well as squares, ceremonial areas, canals, and warehouses. The city is positioned along a steep mountain ridge with stone paths and stairways linking different parts of town. The administrative, political, and ceremonial center of Teyuna was concentrated on the terrace crowning the complex, while the residential districts were spread along the hillsides. Archaeologists believe the Teyuna built Teyuna in the 9th century, about 650 years before Machu Picchu. Its name in the Chibcha language means origins of the peoples of the earth. Living up to its name, it became the spiritual and economic center of the Teyuna people. At its height, Teyuna is thought to have housed between 2,000 and 8,000 inhabitants. The culture had not developed writing, and despite having no knowledge of the wheel or use of draft animals, managed to produce an agricultural surplus for centuries. Teyuna's culture and economy appear to have continued functioning well after the Spanish conquest. The city was abandoned in the 1600s, but many believe that the local population was devastated by diseases introduced by the Spanish rather than by military conquest. From the end of the 1980s, archaeological work at the site was interrupted by violence linked to drug trafficking and the consequences of Colombia's civil war. Work and limited tourist access resumed in 2006. The site remains extremely isolated and challenging to access. Visitors still need to hike for several days to reach it, although they no longer need to hack their way through the jungle to appreciate the fortitude and ingenuity of one of South America's most remarkable cultures.
One of the most interesting mysteries of history and archaeology is the location of the mysterious Land of Punt, mentioned in ancient Egyptian texts. Punt was a faraway kingdom rich in incense, ebony and gold, with whom the Egyptians traded for over 1,000 years. Although there have been many theories over the years, no one has ever discovered the location of this enigmatic land. There have been much recent works on the mystery, however. Recently, the re-examination of the ancient remains of a baboon found in the 19th century in the ancient Egyptian city of Thebes, they have shown that the living animal was probably brought back to Egypt from the Land of Punt. Recent archaeological excavations have also unearthed new evidence which should help in finally tracking down the exact location of the Land of Punt. The Land of Punt. The first mention of Punt comes from the Egyptian Old Kingdom and the Palermo stone. This stone was inscribed about 2500 BC during the reign of King Sahur and describes an expedition to Punt which returned with 80,000 measures of myrrh. In ancient Egypt, myrrh was used to make incense, which they used in temple rituals, and was much prized in the country. Among other things, the expedition to Punt also brought back 23,030 staves of wood, extremely precious in a desert country like Egypt, and 6,000 measures of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. The best known and most thoroughly recorded expedition to Punt was organized by Queen Hatshepsut in 1493 BC in Egypt's 18th dynasty. Hatshepsut was one of the few women to rule Egypt and the first female ruler to take the title pharaoh. The details of this journey are recorded on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahr in the necropolis of Thebes. Part of the inscription on the relief states, "The king himself, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Makri Hatshepsut, the majesty of the court, made supplication at the steps of the Lord of Gods. A command was heard from the great throne, an oracle of the god himself, that the ways to Punt should be searched out, that the highways to the Myrrh terraces should be penetrated. I will lead an army on water and on land to bring marvels from God's land for this god, for the fashioner of her beauty." It was done according to all that the majesty of this revered god commanded, according to the desire of her majesty, in order that she might be given life, stability, and satisfaction like Re forever. But nowhere in the inscription does it exactly say where Punt is. Based on inscriptions from Hatshepsut's reign, historian Barbara Watterson describes what she believes was the route the ancient Egyptians took to the Land of Punt. 5 ships set out from a port on the Red Sea, possibly Uzir, to journey southwards to Suakin, where the expedition disembarked. The voyage had taken between 20 and 25 days, covering an average of about 50 kilometers a day, with the ships hugging the coast rather than risk the dangerous deep water of the Red Sea. From Suakin, the route to Punt was overland through the Red Sea hills. The last known expedition to Punt took place under Ramesses III in the 12th century BC. An ancient papyrus records that Ramesses III constructed great transport vessels loaded with limitless goods from Egypt. They reached the Land of Punt unaffected by any misfortune, safe and respected. We know this expedition returned safely to Egypt, but that is all. No further details are given. The search. Many scholars believe that Punt was a kingdom south of Nubia, perhaps between the Blue Nile and the Red Sea. The precise location has never been discovered. Their arguments have been made for a location in what is today Sudan or Ethiopia, on the basis of the vegetation shown in Egyptian reliefs and paintings. Hatshepsut's bas-relief certainly indicates a location in Africa, as it shows clearly African animals as native of Punt, including the giraffe and rhinoceros, neither of which are found in Arabia. In the 1960s, Rolf Herzog made a detailed study of the flora and fauna and other elements of Punt represented in Hatshepsut's bas-relief, and concluded from his research that Punt lay along the Upper Nile south of Egypt, specifically between the Atbara River and the confluence of the White and Blue Niles. Herzog believed that Punt was reached overland and by river, not by sea. Scholar Mark van der Meerop has a different opinion. He says the Egyptians reached Punt by seagoing boat and found it a country very unlike their own. The representations of houses, animals and plants suggest a location in northeast Africa along the Red Sea coast, possibly the region of modern Eritrea, although a locale farther inland has also been suggested. Egyptologist and expert on the Land of Punt, Kenneth Kitchen, has noted that the fish depicted in Hatshepsut's carvings beneath the Punt ships, along with other marine creatures such as spiny lobster and squid, are plainly recognizable as species that still exist today in the Red Sea. Although Kitchen's theories for the location of Punt is what is today eastern Sudan and northern Ethiopia, extending from the Red Sea to the Nile, is today the most widely accepted one. However, there are still others who believe Punt lay elsewhere. A few years ago, researcher Dimitri Meeks published a paper theorizing that Punt, in fact, lay along the entire western coast of the Arabian Peninsula from the Gulf of Aqaba to Yemen. Meeks said that when all ancient references to Punt are considered together, the location of the mysterious land becomes obvious. He said, Punt, we are told by the Egyptians, is situated in relation to the Nile Valley, both to the north, in contact with the countries of the Near East of the Mediterranean area, and also to the east or southeast, while its furthest borders are far away to the south. Only the Arabian Peninsula satisfies all of these indications. Baboons from Punt. In December 2020, it was reported that Nathaniel Dominy, a primatologist and professor of anthropology at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, had narrowed down the location of Punt using a baboon found in ancient Thebes. These primates are not native to Egypt, but for centuries ancient Egyptians imported thousands of them and later mummified them. Some temples and necropolises contain hundreds of baboon mummies. They're also depicted on the Hatshepsut temple wall at Deir el-Bahari. The majority seem to have lived long lives in captivity, either as pets or service animals, while others may have been kept as part of the worship of the god Thoth, who was occasionally depicted as having a baboon head. Dominy and his researcher team studied chemical isotopes in baboon's tooth enamel for clues to the animal's birthplace. The strontium ratio in the tooth enamel confirmed that the baboon, though found in Egypt, had not been born there. The team then analyzed 2 baboon mummies from the New Kingdom period, 1520 BC to 1075 BC, and 5 from the Ptolemaic period after 332 BC. They found that the New Kingdom baboons were born outside of Egypt in modern-day Eritrea, Ethiopia and Somalia. Interestingly, none of these areas border on Egypt, which suggests that Egyptian sailors were skilled seafarers able to navigate the considerable length of the Red Sea. As a result of his research, Dominy believes that Punt existed in the southern Red Sea region, probably on the coasts of Eritrea and Somaliland. Dominy's report states, Punt was a major emporium of gold, electrum and biological materials such as myrrh, ebony, ivory, shorthorn cattle, leopards and baboons. The importance of these materials is reflected in the 1200-year-old duration of trade between ancient Egypt and Punt, the recovery of mummified baboons from several New Kingdom tombs, which was a period of thriving trade with Punt, raises the possibility of using isotope analysis to source their provenance. We also analysed the hair and the bone of modern baboons in 106 habitats, spanning 5 hypothesized locations of Punt: Eritrea, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Somalia, Western Uganda and Yemen. Our results revealed a high likelihood match with eastern Somalia and the Eritrea-Ethiopia corridor, suggesting that this region was the source of the Papio hamadryas exported to ancient Egypt. Although Dominy's work is commendable, the Somalia and the Eritrea-Ethiopia corridor he mentions as the region of Punt is still a wide area rather than an exact location. For that, the search still goes on. Historians and archaeologists have been debating for centuries about what caused the collapse of the Maya culture and where the people went afterwards. There have been various explanations, but perhaps the most controversial is that the ancient Mayans fled Central America after their societies collapsed and made it all the way to the mountains of North Georgia. This is the contention of researcher Richard Thornton, who believes that an ancient archaeological site near Georgia's highest mountain is possibly the site of the fabled Mayan city of Yapahar, which Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto failed to find in 1540. The enigmatic Maya have fascinated the world since their discovery in the 1840s by John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood. The Maya were a remarkably sophisticated Mesoamerican civilization whose territory included present-day Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, and the southeastern Mexican states of Tabasco, Yucatan, and Quintana Roo. The 6 centuries from about AD 250 to 900 was the classic period of Mayan culture, with their artistic and intellectual achievements were the equal of any pre-Columbian civilization of the Americas. The Maya were the first people of the Americas to keep historical records, most of which adorn stone monuments and contain records of civil events and Mayan calendric and astronomical knowledge. Perhaps the supreme example of the Maya's cultural accomplishments is their extraordinary intricate calendar system, which has a major influence on the later Aztec calendar. This calendar became ominously significant in the early 21st century as, according to one interpretation of its dates, on the winter solstice, around December the 21st, 2012, there would be a catastrophic flood and the world would be destroyed. Since the early days of the study of the Maya, theories as to why their society collapsed have been continually put forward, some more plausible than others. Disease, a social revolution, drought, famine, foreign invasion, overpopulation, disruption in trade routes, earthquakes, and even hurricanes have all been blamed. It is true that initially the Maya managed to stage a long resistance to European rule, but by the time the Europeans landed, the political and economic power, which had formerly sustained a population of around 2 million people, had disappeared. What is known as the Terminal Classic period in Mesoamerica, which lasted from around 800 and 925 AD, witnessed one of the most dramatic civilization collapses in history. Within a century or so, the flourishing classic Maya civilization went into permanent decline, so that their once great cities were abandoned and left in ruins, in most cases to be reclaimed by the jungle and so disappear from human memory for hundreds of years. In less than 200 years, this once great civilization had fallen to a fraction of its former glory. There would be occasional later isolated revivals, but the splendor of the Maya's heyday was gone forever. Recently, an architect named Richard Thornton put forward the controversial theory that the Creek Native American tribe of Georgia were descended from Maya gold miners who originally came from Chichen Itza. He believes that Maya refugees fled Central America and ultimately settled around Ocmulgee, Track Rock, after the Maya collapse. Thornton's theory is based on the discovery of hundreds of rock terraces for agriculture and mounds on the side of Brasstown Bald, Georgia's highest mountain that dates to 900 AD, around the time that the Mayans' collapse in their homeland began. The site is also claimed to possess a sophisticated irrigation system and ruins of several other stone structures with much more hidden underground. Thornton also believes that Brasstown Bald is the site of the fabled Maya city of Yupaha, which Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto failed to find in 1540. Some of Thornton's conclusions about the Mayan connection to Georgia are based on oral history. He also believes that many of the place names in the area strongly suggest a Maya presence there. He says, the archaeological site would have been particularly attractive to Mayas because it contains an apparently dormant volcano fumarole that reaches down into the bowels of the earth. When the English arrived in the southeast, there were numerous Native American towns, its states named Isate in Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, and western North Carolina. They were also aware that both the Itza Mayas of Central America and the Hitchiti Creeks of the southeast actually calls themselves Isate and pronounce the word the same way. The Isate Creeks used many Maya and Totanic words. Their architecture was identical to that of Maya Comonas. The pottery at Ocmulgee National Monument, around 900 AD in central Georgia, is virtually identical to the Maya plain red pottery made by that of Maya commoners. However, for archaeologists to be convinced that some Mayas immigrated to the southeast, an archaeological site was needed that clearly was typical of Mesoamerica, but not the United States. However, archaeologists specializing in the American Southeast object strongly to Thornton's interpretation of the evidence. They point out that Thornton has not produced a single Mesoamerican artifact that has been discovered in Georgia to support his case. Indeed, only one Mexican-made artifact has ever been discovered in the southeastern United States in a Native American culture context at Spiro Mounds in Oklahoma, and this was only confirmed in 2002. On the southeastern side of Brasstown Bald is a mysterious structure known as the Kenimare Mound. Although this huge, five-sided pyramidal mound has long thought to be a large natural wooded hill, archaeological work at the site has revealed that the mound had been partially sculpted out of an existing hill and made into a final form with clay around 900 to 1000 AD. One perhaps significant point is that the Kenimare Mound faces the sunset of the spring and autumn equinox. It's known that during the period between 1150 AD and 1375 AD, the ancestors of the Creek Indians constructed a series of large pentagonal mounds in Georgia, western North Carolina, and eastern Alabama. But the best guess of scholars is that a heretofore unknown people built the Kenimare Mound and that it was later used by the ancestors of the Creek Indians for their ceremonies. But although archaeologists are not sure what the ancient mound was used for or who built it, Richard Thornton has theorized that considering the date, the site could well be a Maya stone pyramid. According to Thornton, there were once stone structures on top of the Kenimare Mound. Longtime residents of the Nakuchi Valley told me that until the late 70s, the ruins of stone temples were on top of the mound and there were several man-made terraces supported by stone walls on the slopes of the hill around it. These ancient stone structures were removed by a family moving from Florida who used the rocks to build a chimney and retaining walls at their new mountain fantasy home. Thornton believes that the Kenimare Mound has far more in common with ancient structures in Central America than anything in the southeastern US. He says the principal reason that Georgia archaeologists have generally ignored the upper Chattahoochee-Soke River basins is that the town sites and mounds are very different than the orthodoxies that were taught in college, but are identical to contemporary town sites in the highlands of Tabasco, Chiapas, southern Guatemala, and western Belize. Smithsonian Institute ethnologist James Mooney stated in his famous book, Myths of the Cherokee, that the massive town that ran along the Chattahoochee for 2 miles was named Itzate. That is the word which the Itza Mayas call themselves. There are other theories about the origins of the peoples and monuments of America's Southeast. On the website of the Edgar Cayce Foundation, there's an article theorizing about peoples from Central America immigrating to Georgia, albeit at a much earlier time than the Maya. The authors, also responsible for the 2020 book Mound Builders, Edgar Cayce's Forgotten Records of Ancient America, take their information from one of Cayce's psychic readings, which said, Cayce made it clear that sometime after 3000 BC, groups of people who had been living in the Yucatan and Mexico entered into America's south and gradually moved north, becoming what we know as mound builders. At the time Cayce made these readings, American archaeology had accepted that mound and pyramid building progressed in the opposite direction, north to south. However, as we have detailed in books and numerous articles, it is now known that the movement of this culture was south to north, precisely as Cayce indicated.